Again, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session when innovation becomes essential transportation in COVID-19. My name is James Reinhardt. I'm the lead transit coordinator with the Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency and will be moderating this session. I'm going to first provide some brief context for the session and then introduce our speakers and let them take it from here. We're going to end the session with some Q&A, so please enter any questions as the presentations are going on into the chat box. This session is closed captioning enabled. You can click on the closed caption button in your Zoom toolbar and choose the options to show the live transcript. Additionally, for those who are visually impaired, the session is compatible with NVDA, JAWS, VoiceOver, and Android TalkBack screen readers. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please also use the chat, and someone from our technical team will do their best to help you resolve it. So, as many of us are aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has required public agencies to rapidly develop creative solutions to meet the complex needs of their communities. This session, we're going to explore the framework used to respond to these unexpected challenges through a partnership between Miami-Dade County and Uber Transit. Our speakers today are Carlos Cruz Casas and Waiching Wong. Carlos is the Assistant Director over Strategic Planning for Miami-Dade County's Department of Transportation and Public Works, where his primary focus is to introduce mobility and innovation. His career includes both public and private sector experience, ranging from conceptual design to implementation of pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and traffic projects. In addition, Carlos now serves as a board member for the Open Mobility Foundation and TRB's Mobility Management Committee. Waiching Wong is the Global Transit Partnership Strategy and Operations Manager for Uber Transit. She works with transit agencies across the globe on partnerships that will help them increase ridership, improve mobility, and gain efficiencies. Prior to joining Uber, Waiching worked as a local transportation planner implementing new transit service in Washington, D.C. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Carlos and Waiching and let them present.
Took me a while to find your mute, but thank you, James. Thank you, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here today in this particular topic, and would love to hear more of your thoughts about this innovation. Let me start with putting some perspective. Even though we're the Department of Transportation and Public Works for Miami-Dade County, that sometimes is a long and ugly name, doesn't match or do justice what we do. We consider ourselves to be more of a mobility management agency. Our role is to provide mobility to our residents in whatever form we have available. But when it's terms of transit, and to put things into perspective, it's a very large system. Miami-Dade County is bigger than some states, and we do have regional and local transportation services for 34 municipalities and even beyond the municipalities. Um, and there's no secret that when the health crisis came in, transit was one of the most impacted mobility systems out there. And Miami-Dade County was not alone in this trend that was happening. As you can tell, and this is not an unfamiliar graphic where transit ridership plummeted, and just like any other transit agencies across the nation, Miami-Dade Transit decided to let me just kind of hold back and identify ways to right match the solution to the needs out there. We immediately went into identifying ways to monitor the ridership in real time throughout the entire day, 24 hours of the day, to start identifying where is our service appropriate to the demand, and so on. And I basically jumped into this agile environment where we're going to assess, adapt, and adjust moving forward. Real data is important. Safety of our operators is important. Safety of the riders is important, and we need to start getting into that mentality of how we can balance the resources that we have in order to provide a better service out there. Um, so a couple of the things that we introduced that are really important to this conversation is immediately we stopped doing fare collection, allowing for rear door boarding for buses to increase the distance between the operator and the riders, and introduce limit capacity in our buses. And that is key because all of a sudden we were limiting the capacity in our buses to 25% of the capacity. But if you think about it, we had to put a service out there that needs to be appropriate for 4 times the ridership that we had in the past. And that is something that no transit agency was well equipped to do in such a short notice. So we start again going back to the data, going back to the approach about how we can keep our riders and operators safe. We looked at real-time passenger loads for all of our buses and identifying corridors that we needed to start adding more service in order to make sure that we keep social distancing requirements and that we don't leave people behind. This is not the time and day to start identifying gaps in the transit network, and we wanted to do everything that we could to make that happen. Um, so as you can imagine, it was a very struggle. Things were changing daily. We had conversation with other transit agencies across the nation, and decided to let's get in. Let's do quick response to the conditions that we had in the moment, and let's figure out what are the options that we have available. And options that are typical in transportation public agency or in not typical to it. It's trying to find what are those aspects that are out there that can help us get into a more robust system that can provide better transportation system. So with that said, when we realize what can we do to increase mobility with Miami-Dade County with the same resources that we have in a more efficient manner, one of the first things we identified is we have nine overnight services, basically 9 routes that provided service overnight throughout Miami-Dade County. And it basically, with the curfews available and with the other limitation of mobility at that time, we identified it is better for us to take those resources, those operators and buses, and then place them during the day in order to increase capacity for major corridors we're hurting at the time. But at the same time, we still have a population that needed mobility in the middle of the night. We have population that needed to rely on us to move around. And most likely, if you think about it, if you were on a stay-at-home order and you needed to move around Miami-Dade County between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m., most likely you were an essential employee, right? An essential worker, someone that was keeping our community moving, right? So we wanted to, quickly start looking at what can we do in order to provide service for those that needed us the most at a particular time. That's why I reached out and Waiching is going to be going in more detail, but we decided to start going into a program, an innovative program where we explore the available resources from a partnership with companies like Uber and Lyft to provide a voucher-like program for trips to and from anywhere along these corridors for in Miami-Dade County between midnight and 5 a.m. So we call it go nightly because we wanted you to still go and we wanted you to still trust in us and know that we were able to move you around Miami-Dade County. And we introduced this program to provide those trips. Last, I'm going to say, but not least, it is a really innovative approach to start talking about how we can right size the vehicle to the need and still be participant in the mobility ecosystem, so still be participant of what a public transit agency can still do to provide trips around them, and be able to maximize the use of our resources somewhere else. With that, I think, what Waiching, you and I have been talking about a great deal about how Uber and transit can work together, and we would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so that is exactly the context in which Carlos and I started having conversations, right when the stay-at-home order occurred in Miami-Dade. So he and I were already talking quite a bit because I work for the Uber Transit team. So what is the Uber Transit team? We are, next slide, Carlos, a group of folks that are dedicated within Uber to work specifically to help transit agencies increase ridership, lower costs, if that's applicable, extend that reach of transit, and to really improve the customer experience. And so Carlos and I, as we were talking, he was incredibly clear about what it was that would help the Miami-Dade community. And so we kind of put our heads together and said, well, is there something within kind of our product suite at Uber right now that we can deploy right away as fast as possible, because there is a need in the community that just needs to be met. And so next slide. We partner a ton with all kinds of transit agencies across the globe. And that's kind of where a lot of our products, the development of it came from. It's from communities, like Miami-Dade, that give us feedback about the things that communities need and how a company like Uber might be able to help. And so next slide. When we talk about kind of the things that Uber tends to talk to agencies about, it's kind of in these three buckets. It's rides for transit, which is ended up to be the solution that we ended up working with Miami-Dade on, and it becomes really configurable subsidized trip programs to kind of help feed more people into the transit system, or frankly to help in situations where you want to have some supplemental supply and right size the vehicle to the service. We have other kind of services and products that are similar to transit software, where we are able to deploy in a situation where an agency has buses and operators that they want to deploy onto our network. We also have things that are within what a lot of folks are calling, the mobility as a service platform, which is journey planning or in-app ticketing, or ways for people to just access transportation to transit in a way that is much more in their hands. So through all of this, Carlos already knew all this about us when he gave us a call, and we kind of honed in on that first part, which is, can we think about a way to work with a rides for transit type of a product that helps Miami-Dade Transit reach the results that they're looking for? So next slide. So we ended up honing in into a product that is this one that's in front of you, which is basically transit vouchers, where we provide riders, anybody within Miami-Dade County that needs that mobility option will be able to have this voucher into their hands in their phones. So next slide. The way that it works is through, it kind of looks like this when you're in the app. So before, like a couple slides back, Carlos also showed, the schematic of what it looks like at the bus stop and the bus station with the actual signs that were in bus shelters and at bus stops. But basically the point is there was also a QR code that was on there. Folks that, let's say, walk up to a bus shelter and see that, oh, service is suspended due to COVID, but I do have another option. They're able to take their phone, scan that QR code, and then it would pop into their phone that first, screen here into their Uber app. And it'll say you've been sent a voucher. Even if you don't have an app, if you click the accept voucher button, it'll actually send you to the Play Store or to the Apple Store to be able to download the app. Once they get through that flow, they'll see the view, which is basically all the rules within the system. So in a view for Miami-Dade Transit, would actually show all the different bus routes that Carlos and his team sent to us to say, these are the places and the areas where we want the voucher to apply. So it's actually really important to note that, Miami-Dade Transit was in control of all of those parameters, meaning where exactly a person is able to use that voucher, and also the pricing that was available for folks within the app. It'll show up in the app as a payment option, and then when they redeem it, all the rules will apply. It'll work like any other scenario where you're requesting a ride within Uber. If you're meeting all of Miami-Dade's Transit's requirements, then it will show up that you've claimed the voucher. So next slide. And of course, Miami-Dade Transit was also wanted to really make sure that anybody was able to access this program, not just the folks that have cell phones or reception or like lack of better Wi-Fi or availability of data within their phones. And so we also worked with them to get this dashboard into their customer service center, which was running 24/7. And so this screenshot and this flow of the thing that's moving kind of around on the right-hand side is what we call Uber Central. It allows for Miami-Dade Transit and really any other transit agency that works with us that has a call center to have their call center staff actually book those rides for the customer. So anybody that's already calling your line is able to do this. And the pickup information and all of that is sent to somebody's brick phone if they have it. If they provide you with a brick phone number, they'll get it via text, or we'll also call landlines with voiceover to give them directions. Say, hi, there's a trip coming for Carlos. It's coming in 5 minutes. Here's the actual name of the driver, plus the driver's license plate number will be kind of in that voiceover or that text message for customers. So this is a way for Miami-Dade Transit be able to provide that same service to customers if they don't have a cell phone. I think Carlos wants to jump in here.
No, didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that's an excellent point, right? And one thing to notice too, this is a fully web-based solution. So again, in a moment that even agencies like ours, we're hit with not being able to work at the office and having people working from home, we're able to facilitate our staff with their own computer, their own basically voice over IP phone to be able to take those call centers from the comfort of their home, right? So the fact that it's not on premise, the fact that it's fully web based, it gives us a lot of flexibility for us to address equity without having to basically impose additional kind of hardship into our own staff, right? I think that's something else worth highlighting, Waiching.
Cool. And so that's kind of all that we want. It was a really quick run over the features, but it kind of gives you all a flavor of what it was that we were able to use with Miami-Dade Transit. So next slide, we're going to start jumping into kind of outcomes and like key learnings for us as we kind of got into this pilot with Miami-Dade Transit. So this is just some of the outcomes, at least just from the numbers perspective, like what we have been working with them on. And so there have been over 10,000 trips completed, and it doesn't maybe look like a very large number, but just keep in mind, these are trips that are only available between the hours of, I think it was midnight and 5 a.m. And so not a lot of folks are moving at that time regardless, but we are moving people because there are 876 unique riders on this service. So we now know that we've at least served this many unique people. And frankly, it's a fairly kind of responsive service because it is on demand. The average wait time was 6 minutes. And so for us, we feel pretty good about that, considering it at that time of day, or rather at that time of night. That seems like a feasible thing for us. I think where things get really fun, and Carlos and I could probably share a little bit of kind of the how we got there, is that we were able to basically, go from an initial discussion where Carlos and I were talking and kind of batting back and forth ideas about how it is that we might be able to meet their needs, to an actual contract signing. We got there in 2 weeks, and we were able to go live, in less than 48 hours. It was something where, frankly, it took a lot of time maybe for us to like make sure that all the communications was correct, to customers, because this is a change for customers, no doubt about it. But as far as the product suite itself, we were really kind of already ready to go, which we thought was hopefully helpful for Miami-Dade Transit, because of course there was a really dire need in the community and we needed to get to it, yesterday at that point. So Carlos, maybe I'll flip to you a little bit on this one, on the operations side, what some of the things you guys were able to achieve.
Perfect. So as you guys can tell, it was a way of how to bring some mobility innovation, some mentality, that idea that a lot of people are talking about for many years, and already finding a use case that is this immediate and have a great need in solving something for us. So if you think about it, and when in the perspective about safety and RX3, in the perspective about addressing the needs around transit, the people riding at night, they have a better experience, you might say. They have a less waiting time. They basically felt more comfortable taking the trip to and from the destination. But still, the big benefit that we found out through this partnership was not necessarily those riding at night. It was the fact that as a transit agency, really challenged with the need to provide better transportation services, and the challenge with the need of limited capacity and limited basically staffing, if you will, due to the impacts of COVID, we were able to reallocate those resources running at night, potentially very inefficiently, to the middle of the day, to those corridors where we actually were in need, that even today, when we have a threefold basically service out there, still leaving people behind. So this is something that I'm really passionate. It brings me some passion on it, the fact that we can really right size the solution to the need that we have at the moment. And make sure that the vehicle is appropriate. Running a 40-foot bus, a 60-foot bus to carry 2-3 people in one direction at one time is not necessarily the best use of the vehicle at that time, right? So I think that's something really interesting for us to start figure out. This approach of we no longer need to be just a public transportation provider, but a facilitator of trips and making sure that we do it in the most efficient fashion. And the fact that, that this perhaps is an eye-opening approach. For many years, we've been discussing the fact that the transit desert is a no-go as an entity. We should not allow ever to have a transit desert, meaning an area where transit is not running, right? And I think now things are changing a little bit where partnership like this can allow us to perhaps have that transit desert, but it will never be a mobility desert. It will never be a place that when people needs to move around, they don't have an option. And I think this is particularly some of the outcomes in the operation that we're looking into is, we do have solutions that we put in place to provide mobility as a transportation provider, but do we need to do it everywhere and at every single time, every single hour of the day? And probably the answer is no. There are other tools in the toolbox that we can use in order to provide better experience to the user. So I think this is something that I wanted to kind of start wrapping up and start getting some of this kind of really good conversation here today. There is a few things that we found out that were efficient for us. From our point of view, and like Waiching mentioned, we were clear from the beginning what we wanted to do. And there is a lot of conversation, can public sector and private sector work together? And my answer is going to be yes. But it is very important that you have a clear goal and expectation of what you want to achieve. And when you align those goals, their work becomes easy. Our partnership when Uber Transit and Miami-Dade County were aligned, all of a sudden getting the contracts in place, getting the logistics in place, right? It became easy in how we can actually implement this. And I think that's always very, very clear and very important for us to have as we move forward and think about beyond this. The other thing that I think was very clear too is we allow ourselves some room for growth. The fact that we knew that we have 9 routes that we're running 24/7, that we needed to reallocate those resources, but we flipped the switch like that in 48 hours, as you noticed. But we basically left some little spots behind. It was so flexible, the opportunity in this type of partnership, the fact that we were able to add other areas as needed and modify the hours if appropriate. I think that is something that it can help when you're thinking about this partnership moving forward is, don't set yourself in a box that you're not able to kind of ideate and basically innovate around for it. And think about how creative you can become by providing some of these technology solutions into your day-to-day work, because there's options out there like this one and others that can help make it easier for transit agencies to operate, and ultimately to make sure we don't train people away from transit, to make sure that they still rely on us to help move around. Actually, you wanted to add anything on it?
No, with that, I would love to get some feedback from you all and get to Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Carlos and Waiching. Fantastic presentation. Looks like we've had a few questions that have rolled in. I think the first one that we wanted to ask was, how did Miami-Dade Transit address issues of equity and access, in particular those the riders that without smartphones?
Excellent. So from the beginning, we decided this is the type of goals that brings into this conversation. When we reached out to Waiching and said, Waiching, we want to do this, or we have this need, but we're not going to implement it if someone that doesn't have a smartphone cannot tap into, right? I think that was set from the beginning, and Waiching said, okay, so I have the solution for you. You don't even to have a smartphone. You can put a 786 number out there, and we can redirect that to a call center, and you can provide your staff to provide those kind of bookings, right? So from the beginning, we decided that was clear. We want to basically limit anyone's ability and participation to be here. And it was not in that question, but let me add to it too. Sometimes we get asked to, what about people with limited mobility? How a program like Go Nightly can serve our entire population. So again, this is something that we learned. Again, we didn't want to confine ourselves to a box. So our Goat Nightly program includes the in voucher and in-app voucher, the redemption, the call-in number for the Uber trip, and also a call-in number for a wheelchair accessible vehicle. So again, it was a very robust system that it comprised of different providers, but we as an agency, and again, it was about building trust. It was about not having people walk away from transit, and it was very clear for us that we need to work for everyone at that time.
Yeah, I think I would just add that there is innovation in the fact that Carlos was willing and wanting to stack all of these features to create a full set of solutions that works for as many people in the community as possible, right? Like I really just want to double down on that one. That one was for me, I was floored, I think, by how willing they were to be able to think outside the box and say, okay, if we can't do this part of it, maybe we can find some other way to support folks in the community that need something else. And so for me, I think it was really just refreshing to kind of watch how he was working on that level, just to make sure that the entire program was accessible. So put that out there. And that tech is never the silver bullet, said from the person at Uber. So
Great. Looks like we had two questions that came in back to back that kind of work in tandem. So I'm going to ask both at the same time. First question was, is the Uber ride free for the rider? And then the second question, what was the average cost per trip? And I think that question can be, well, one, if it wasn't free for the rider, what was the cost for the rider? And then if it was free, what was the cost for Miami-Dade County to cover the free ride?
Mhm. So I'll jump in with the first half of that, and Waiching, you can help me with the second one. Uh, so it was free for the rider, right? Again, it was a no cost to the rider, and the reason why is, you know, our bus system has been fare free since March of last year, right? It's one of the things that we introduced in order to minimize the impacts of the health crisis here. So we didn't feel that it was right to penalize someone that is still relying on us to move around to provide charge. So it was the same cost as a bus, the same cost as a train, the same cost as an STS, special transportation services, which is fare free at the moment. Then we looked at it, and we wanted to provide us individual route approaches. I don't know if you remember that map, and if you're familiar with Miami-Dade County, we're a very large area. Some of these routes are 20, 30 miles long, right? So we start looking at really what is the potential cost that can actually take for us to do that. And at the same time, we compare, from our point of view, what was the current cost to Miami-Dade County at the moment to provide it directly by us, right? And I think, Waiching, I think you have some numbers in terms of what was the average cost. And the one thing I can tell you is we decided, and we put a cap in the contract. Waiching mentioned it. When you are here, you control the program. We basically said no more than 2 trips per day, per night, if you will, considering that might be an option for people just to go to and from a destination, and not to exceed $45 per trip, right? And I know that sounds a little bit high, but even in a transit network that is running at that time, we have routes that were operating at 60, 80, $100 per passengers, just because the cost of operation for us, right? So I think that's something to point out, and I think it was very pleasantly surprised the fact that we were able to really bring that cost down significantly, even though we put a cap of $45. We're nowhere near that, right, Wichi?
looking for my mute button.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. As far as like the total spend, we're not there yet for the Miami-Dade Transit, and I think it's also partially just to let folks know that part of thinking about this was also there was already kind of lots of communication during this time, because a lot of it was there was still stay-at-home orders and other things, that this really is a service for people that essentially needed to travel, right? And so there wasn't a lot of travel. And I'm not talking about lots of volume, because on our end as Uber, we even, we also doubled down on that kind of narrative as well, that, even though our job is to, get everyone moving, at the moment, it's not safe to get moving. And so let's respect the public health concerns. And so total spend is not large, but for us, I think the impact is huge. So for us, we're really excited. happy, I think, with this partnership. As far as the actual like cost per trip is concerned, I actually have to look that up because I need to find it in a couple of different places. Because right now, because of the way that the program is truncated through two different kind of dashboards and different products, I'd have to go back and check. So I don't have a ready answer for you all right now, unfortunately.
Yeah. We can continue, James, but as far as some of the averages that I've seen, it was $13-15 per passenger, right? Which is in a transit agency at that time is not outrageous, right? And basically, compared to some of the routes that we have, we found that at least it became efficient, right? So again, that's just an initial kind of top of mind, but we can get you more details about it.
Okay, great. Another question that we had came in that was asking, how does this program integrate with the Guaranteed Ride Home program for commuters?
So this was basically an approach to the emergency situation that we had at the moment. And at that point, right? So the guarantee right program for the South Florida Commuter Services is for commuters that are using transit to and from their work. The fact that this was a overnight service, it was not immediately integrated, but we do have a great relationship with SFCS. And as we start thinking about what's next, right, and how we can start working together, we are definitely thinking about that. Now, something to consider, there was specifically within a geofence area along the impacted routes. It was basically not a going to home. It was within a quarter mile distance from the alignment of the route. And we use a quarter mile because in the transportation industry, as you know, it is considered a walkable distance, right? So instead of just saying just that set on the particular route alignment, we were a little bit more flexible and say we just at least wanted to give you that's the basically near door to door service.
Great. How did Miami-Dade Transit initially determine which bus lines to target for this project?
Mm-hmm. So that became simple. We looked at it. We're looking at, again, for this particular project, we only had 9 routes that were running 24/7, right? So the initial component is how do we look at the maximize the use of our resources. So we made the policy decision, say we don't want to stop services for us operating them at midnight, and all the routes are running between midnight and 5. They're going to be participating in this program. Again, this we have 99 routes, so there's a lot of different routes having a lot of different experiences. And as we move forward, we are exploring what does it mean. What does it mean for us to have this type of partnership? Can that be applied to other times of the day or so on?
Great. And how could this type of partnership help agencies with promoting types of mobility that utilize active transportation modes?
So again, this to me is the first thing is in moments of need, we were there for our riders, right? In moments of need where we were not able or it was better for us to put our resources somewhere else, we didn't say good luck to you and just find something else. We were there to provide. So that's the first thing because it is critical that we understand the mobility ecosystem start with transit and end with transit, but there's other options around that can help around that, right? So I think that's a component that it talks about active transportation, still be a transit user, still be providing basically relied on other mobility solutions, not only just purchasing and using your own car. But behind, I think on that particular question, there's a message between the lines that says, can you apply this to 2 wheels instead of 4 wheels? And I think the answer is yes, right? What we're proving in here is that there is an opportunity for us to enter into partnership with the private sector to provide mobility when it's needed and where it's needed and a more appropriate way to deliver it. It is better to do this tripped because it was low ridership. It's a lot of exposure in our operators, and we're spending a lot of money on fixed route services at that time, where perhaps this is a better solution to it. So now thinking out loud and start looking at what this can be translated into the future moving forward, might as well be that we look at Miami-Dade County as a whole. We say, you know what, we're going to go through now to our Better Bus project. We're reallocating resources to high frequency routes. We're making sure we have a solid foundation of transit. And if there are areas that need connecting to the high frequency network, might as well start exploring partnership like this one with TNCs and with two wheels, like with scooters and bicycles. There's a lot of potential here to start promoting that and identifying what's the right size vehicle to provide that trip, and how an agency like ours can play a role in making sure people have that option.
Great. And so to transition a little bit to a few questions that were related to sustainability, um, this question had, I think, 3 or 4 parts. So hold on. Uh, First question was, has use gone up through the pandemic? Do you anticipate bringing back the 9 late night routes, or has this, through this partnership, made it more cost efficient? And would would your transit team be open to permanently transition some of these routes to an Uber Transit for cost efficiency?
So there's a lot on that, but yeah, I think what we're learning is that it's a right solution for the need, right? And I think you talk about Uber Transit, but it's a bunch of building blocks that allow us to basically walk away from a fixed route on this one. One thing I'm going to say is there is no substitute for a fixed route service when you have a high number of people going the same direction at the same time, right? So I think this is something that as we continue to evaluate, what are the options out there, we're going to continue to monitor ridership and continue to monitor with the experience and continue to monitor the options out there. So of course, there is an opportunity for us to basically consider a more long-term pattern, if you will, or relationship with programs that go nightly to be more efficient in the use of our resources. And particularly as we continue to experience, COVID hasn't left town yet, right? And the social distancing hasn't left town yet. And the expectation from our riders that we need to provide a good, reliable transit system is going to be here to stay for a long time. So if we can basically identify ways to provide better mobility solutions and at least at a par with fixed route services at that time and reallocate those resources during the day, we're going to do it. Ultimately, we need to maximize the use of our resources, and right now we see a big need for transit to be very frequent during the entire day. And the last thing I'm going to mention is, I mean, entire day, not only peaking environment, working from home and other aspects are putting a lot more pressure on us to provide more consistent headway throughout the midday, early mornings, evenings, right? So now we need to have more buses running, basically the big chunk of the day. So if I need to take it away from the late night service to put in there, it will be a very efficient way to do so.
Great, Carlos. Thank you. Next question that I got in was, looks like it's going to be more for Waiching. It's about ridership experience. From the rider's perspective, was there any friction when interacting with Uber Transit, either by app or phone? And if so, how did you ease that experience, that perspective?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's always a bit of a learning curve for everyone, especially when the what you were expecting was just to ask something much more simple, which is to walk up to a bus. So completely understood. So we tried to put in as much kind of training information or at least details of exactly how to go through the entire kind of claim flow process for the vouchers as much as possible. We also worked with Carlos and his team of folks that were actually doing the intake on the phone side to train up those folks to be able to answer some questions if they could, if the questions were coming into their call center as well. And so I think we try our best to kind of get ahead of that stuff with more information and over communicating. And that's what we try our best to do. Maybe Carlos has some other things that might have come in from the customer service side on your end.
It was a learning experience, right? So now again, it was so quick. If you think about it, that we had to stand up a call center to take these intakes of the call and coordinate with the platform, with basically with the Uber drivers. And again, the same way that you see the little vehicle arriving to your destination on a smartphone, we want people to have a similar experience, right, when they're calling in, right? So there was a learning experience for us to do that, but we put a lot of effort to make sure that our call center was with the rider and coordinating the pickups and drop out location, particularly the pickup, right? Where's my driver driver, what is the rider, that type of thing that you have, right? So I think that was very critical for us to maintain. At the same time, we also basically we mentioned we want to expect the same level of cleanliness and sanitation and all the different requirements that we put in our buses, right? So there was a lot of that expectation that we're putting out there, a lot of messaging about the using the facial covering, a lot of messaging about disinfecting, a lot of messaging about all that, right? All that was very important for us. So the experience from the user, it was a la part to what we had on fixed route services. And even when we had the wheelchair accessible vehicles, we did it with our own STS provider, so we still had that option to make sure that the experience was similar across the different modes.
Great. Thank you both. So it looks like we've got time for one more question. This question is regarding the slide that you showed that showed how fast this relationship was formed. So what was the procurement process? And was this an RFP or was it through a different process?
This is record time, right? And um, we were under a emergency order, right? So we had the opportunity to introduce a contracts from an emergency basis, right? So this was a direct contracting, if you will. We reached out to both Uber and Lyft, which are the providers in here. We reached out to others that they were not around, just providing the option. But it was not an RFP, if you will, right? But that was only during the consideration that we were an emergency, and the most important thing for us was to turn around quickly. But still, all the requirements from our legal team, or the requirements for the risk management, all the requirements that we typically will have are included in there, right? It was more about the mechanism to get there. And you will see that, every agency we did that for cleaning companies, for this vehicles, for new buses that we brought in town. So basically, it was a lot of different things that the agency was able to do in a rather quickly fashion in order to provide better service to the riders.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we're about at time, so thank you both to Carlos and Waiching for sharing all this great story and the success with all of us. Just a couple things before we go. There is going to be a link added to the chat box that's going to be to access a survey to share your thoughts on this session. So please take the time to go through that and share your thoughts and give a shout out to both Carlos and Waiching on all their hard work and great job presenting today. And additionally, there's also going to be a link to the Safe Streets Summit People's Choice Award, where you can cast your vote for for your favorite complete streets effort in Miami-Dade, Broward, or Palm Beach County. You'll be able to see both of those coming up soon, or it looks like they're both coming up now. So please take the time to click on both of those links and enjoy the rest of the Safe Streets Summit. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.